The wind off the Atlantic doesn't just bite, it chews. It's December 2010. Ocean Parkway is a ribbon of asphalt stretching through a graveyard of scrub brush and salt marsh. It's a place where things go to be forgotten. The waves hit the shore with the sound of a closing casket. The cops weren't looking for a serial killer. They were looking for a ghost named Shannon Gilbert. She'd made a call, a frantic 23-minute scream into the void. Then she ran into the reeds. The swamp swallowed her whole. Officer John Malia and his dog, Blue, were combing the thicket. Blue didn't find Shannon. He found a bundle. Rough, brown, burlap. Inside, the remains of what used to be a person. Then they found another, and another, and another. 4 women, wrapped like packages, placed at even intervals, like a twisted gardener planting seeds of misery. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a project, a cold, calculated curation of death. Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Barthélemy, Megan Waterman, Amber Costello. They called them the Gilgo Four. They were petite, they were vulnerable, they were missing. But the world didn't look for them until the smell of the marsh became too strong to ignore. The salt air preserves the skin, but it rots the soul. The investigation was born in the mud, and in the mud, it stayed for a long, long time. The killer was out there, breathing the same salt air, watching the news, smirking. He knew the tides, he knew the brush. He knew that in a place like this, the dead stay buried, unless the dogs get hungry. The burlap was the signature, a working man's material. Heavy duty, designed to hold weight, designed to hide the contents. It wasn't silk, it wasn't lace, it was utility. The killer looked at these women as cargo, something to be transported, something to be dumped. The crime scene was a masterpiece of nihilism. No clothes, no jewelry, no identity, just bone and burlap and the endless, indifferent roar of the ocean. The police tape flapped in the wind like a yellow flag of surrender. For 10 years, the case went cold, ice cold. The kind of cold that gets into your marrow and stays there. The files sat in boxes, gathering dust in the basement of the Suffolk County Police Department. The shadows grew longer. The investigation was a circus of incompetence and corruption. Commissioner James Burke was a man with his own demons. He didn't want the FBI poking around. He didn't want outsiders looking at his backyard. He kept the feds out, and in doing so, he kept the killer in. Whispers filled the bars and the diners. They said the killer was a cop. They said the killer was a judge. They said the killer was someone important. That's the thing about a small town on a big island. Everyone thinks they know who the monster is, but nobody wants to be the one to point the finger. The families of the victims waited. They cried. They screamed at the sky, but the sky didn't answer. The girls were labeled prostitutes in the press, a label that acts like a shield for a killer. If the world doesn't value the victim, it doesn't hunt the murderer. The killer was a ghost, a phantom who knew how to use burner phones like a spy. He'd call the sisters of his victims. He'd taunt them. He'd describe what he did in a voice as flat as a dial tone. He enjoyed the grief. He feasted on the aftermath. The leads were dead ends. A white truck, a tall man, a John who got too violent. But the descriptions were vague. They were sketches drawn in smoke. The trail didn't just go cold, it evaporated. But time is a funny thing. It moves forward, but it leaves crumbs. Technology caught up to the monster. The Suffolk County way started to crumble. A new team stepped in. New eyes, new hunger. They didn't care about the old politics. They cared about the girls in the burlap. They started from the beginning. They looked at the phones, the pings, the digital footprints that weren't visible in 2010. They followed the signals from the heart of Manhattan to the quiet suburbs of Massapequa Park. They were looking for a man who moved like a shadow between two worlds. A professional in the city, a neighbor in the suburbs, a predator in the marsh. The Venn diagram was small, and in the center of it, a name started to emerge. Rex Heuermann, a name that sounds like the grinding of gears. 6'4", 270 pounds. A mountain of a man who blended into the crowd. He was an architect. He dealt in structure. He dealt in permits. He knew how to follow the rules of the city so he could break the laws of God. He lived in a house that looked like a haunted memory. A small, dilapidated structure in Massapequa Park. The paint was peeling. The porch was sagging. It was the kind of house kids run past on Halloween. But inside, it was a fortress. His office was in Midtown, Fifth Avenue, the heart of the machine. He took the Long Island Railroad every day. He sat among the commuters. He read his paper. He checked his watch. He was the most boring man on the planet, and that was his great disguise. But his digital life was a sewer. When the task force cracked the door, they didn't find blueprints. They found a basement of horrors, thousands of searches. Not for architecture, not for buildings, for torture, for pain, for the Gilgo Beach investigation itself. He was obsessed with his own myth. He was a student of his own crimes. He wanted to know what the cops knew. He wanted to see if they were getting close. He was a predator who enjoyed watching the hunters stumble. He had a massive collection of firearms, hundreds of them, stored in a walk-in vault. He was a man prepared for a war that only existed in his head. Or maybe he was just prepared for the day the knock finally came at the door. He used burner phones to contact the women. He thought he was being careful. He thought he was a ghost, but he used those phones near his office. He used them near his home. He left a trail of pings that acted like a breadcrumb trail of neon light. And then there was the truck, the green Chevrolet Avalanche. A witness had seen it back in 2010, a first-generation model. It was a specific detail, a mistake. Even an architect makes a miscalculation. He kept the truck. He kept the evidence of his own undoing parked in his driveway. The task force watched him. They followed him to work. They watched him eat. They watched him live a life he didn't deserve. They were waiting for the final piece. The one thing he couldn't hide, his own biological signature. The stakeout was grueling. The investigators were shadows behind tinted glass. They watched Rex walk down a Manhattan street. He was carrying a pizza box, a mundane act, a man bringing dinner home. But that box was a gold mine. He tossed it in a trash can. He kept walking. The investigators moved in. They didn't want the pizza. They wanted the crust. They wanted the cells he'd left behind. They wanted the code that would unlock a decade of misery. In a lab, the science of the future met the sins of the past. They'd found a hair on the burlap back in 2010. A male hair. It had been sitting in an evidence locker, a silent witness waiting for its moment. They compared it to the DNA from the crust. It was a match. The odds of it being anyone else were astronomical. The architect had built a cage, and the bars were made of his own DNA. The Mount Rushmore of evidence was complete. The truck, the phones, the hair, the pizza, July 13th, 2023. Midtown Manhattan. The sun was setting over the Hudson. Rex Heuermann was leaving his office. He thought it was just another Thursday. He thought he was going to catch the train. He thought he was going home to his quiet life. The takedown was surgical. No sirens, no shouting, just a circle of men in suits. They closed in. Rex didn't fight. He didn't run. He just looked at them with a face that was a total blank. The mask hadn't slipped. It had just become permanent. Back in Massapequa Park, the neighbors watched as the blue tents went up. They watched as the excavators tore into the yard. They watched as the man they'd known for decades was revealed to be a monster. He'd been there all along, barbecuing, mowing the lawn, helping with the taxes. They found the vault in the basement. They found the weapons. They found the trophies. But more than that, they found the silence. The crushing, heavy silence of a man who had no conscience. He wasn't a man who lost control. He was a man who lived for it. The families of the Gilgo Four finally got the call they'd been waiting for. But justice isn't a cure. It's just a closure. The girls are still gone, the sand is still cold, and the ocean still roars, indifferent to the lives taken on its shores. The story doesn't end with a gavel. It ends with a question. How many others? The investigators are looking at cases across the country. Las Vegas, Atlantic City, anywhere the architect's business took him, anywhere there's a strip of sand and a dark stretch of road. Rex sits in a cell now. He wears a jumpsuit, he eats jail food, he's no longer the master of his domain. He's just a number in the system, but his house still stands, a rotting monument to a decade of terror. The neighbors want it gone. They want the memory erased. But you can't erase the marsh. You can't wash away the salt. The Atlantic will keep hitting that shore. The wind will keep chewing at the dunes. And the people of Long Island will always look at the scrub brush along Ocean Parkway with a shiver of recognition. Evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a neighbor. Sometimes it looks like a professional. Sometimes it looks like a man who just wants to get home in time for dinner. That's the real horror. Not the burlap, not the marsh, but the mundane nature of the beast. The Gilgo Beach case isn't a mystery anymore. It's a tragedy. A story of a predator who exploited the cracks in society. A story of women who were forgotten before they were even gone. And a story of a man who thought he could build a monument to death and never have to pay the rent. The lights are off in the architect's office. The blueprints are rolled up. The city continues to grow, its skyline reaching for the clouds. But underneath the concrete and the steel, there's always the mud. There's always the dirt. And there's always the dark. The ocean is a hungry mouth. It doesn't give back what it takes. But sometimes it spits out the truth. And the truth is a bitter pill to swallow. It doesn't bring back the dead. It just reminds the living that the shadows are never as empty as they seem. Stay out of the marsh. Stay off the parkway after dark. Because even when the monster is behind bars, the darkness he left behind still lingers. It's in the wind. It's in the salt. It's in the very fabric of the island. The case is closed, but the nightmare is wide awake. Rex Heuermann is a name we'll remember, but the names we should remember are the ones he tried to bury. Maureen, Melissa, Megan, Amber, and all the others who are still waiting to be found in the burlap of history. The salt didn't wash away the sin. It preserved it. And now, the world has to look at what it tried to ignore for 13 years. It's not a pretty sight, but the truth never is. It's just the truth. Cold, hard, and final. Case closed, but the void remains. It always